and since they're not state preserves, I think the traffic that is on them is substantially more because they're open and available for use. So I think the traffic that
All right, we are officially live on YouTube. I'm dropping the link in the chat for all of our panelists and attendees in case you want to share it with people who aren't with us on Zoom. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Before I hand it off to our host, Max, from the Museum of Life and Science, I'm just going to quickly share my screen and show you where you can find this recording afterward on SciStarter. You go to SciStarter.org/NOAA-Life and Science, and you'll be able to find the recording here forever and ever and share it with all your friends and family. And also, you'll find ways to participate in some of the projects you hear about today, like ISeeChange. So yeah, thank you so much to Max for organizing this, and I'll let you take it away.
Caroline, thank you, and thanks SciStarter so much for helping us to organize this. And I think this is a really lovely opportunity. So welcome to our panel discussion today about 3 trends we're keeping an eye and ear on and how you can help from home. My name is Max Cawley. I'm Program Manager for Learning Philosophy and Evaluation at the Museum of Life and Science in Durham, North Carolina. For those of y'all who might be new to the museum, we're a 74-year-old institution in our beautiful community of Durham, North Carolina, and we're located on an 84-acre campus. We value inquiry-based learning, inclusive and participatory science, and believe in the transformative potential of informal science learning. However, like all of y'all, we are, of course, also stuck at home right now. The science, the learning, and the potential for transformative hands-on experiences need not stop, though. And today, we are joined by our friends in our community who have graciously agreed to join us to chat about some interesting patterns that we've all been noticing. First, from our Associate Program Manager of the Lab at the Museum of Life and Science, we'll talk about a fascinating supermarket trend we've been noticing. I'll let them go into that in a second. Then, with our friends Dr. Kathie Dello, the State Climatologist of North Carolina, Sam Harrington, Community Manager at ISeeChange, Dr. Jennifer Wiggen, Associate Program Manager for Earth Moves, and Calvin Cupini, Manager for Citizen Science at Clean Air Carolinas, we'll talk about climate and phenology. And lastly, we'll hear from our friend Dr. Jeremy Hoffman, who is the Chief Scientist at the Science Museum of Virginia and self-proclaimed data madman, who's been looking at a lot of post-COVID trends and who's found one I think you'll really want to hear. Get it? Okay. Enough for me. We've got a lot of panelists and not nearly as much time as I know we'd all like. So I'll turn it over to our illustrious panel here in just a moment. Last thing I'll mention is that the museum has a SciStarter landing page that you just saw. As part of an ongoing collaborative NOAA environmental literacy grant with 7 other museums across the country. That's also where the recorded version of this video will live. You can find that at SciStarter.org/NOAA/Life and Science. I'll drop the link into the chat box. If you're interested in other participatory science experiments we're working on, you can keep up with all of our activities while we're closed at lifeandscience.org/activities. Okay, we are just about to hear about some amazing opportunities to immerse yourself in deep and authentic science learning while also connecting with and contributing to growing bodies of scientific knowledge. I am so excited to be learning with all of you today. With that, I will turn it over to my friend Peregrine. Take it away, Peregrine.
Hey friends, my name is Peregrine. As Max said, I'm the Associate Program Manager for the Lab at the Museum of Life and Science in Durham, North Carolina. And I wanted to kind of start off our talk today with something that I think probably we have all noticed going to the supermarket. Other than various places for outdoor exercise, the supermarket's kind of the one place we can go right now outside of our homes. And whenever we visit it, perhaps when we're going to get one of our kind of staple household food items, bread, we notice that the shelves are pretty empty. I've definitely noticed that anything from French bread to Italian bread to sliced bread to all kinds of things are kind of gone off the shelves. So being kind of a DIYer myself, I think, okay, well, I can make my own bread. People have been doing this for thousands of years. And I go to the baking aisles need And if I'm lucky, I can grab some flour. That's good. I know I've got water at home, some other ingredients at home. I cast my glance over to where I know the packets of yeast would be and see, lo and behold, again, an empty shelf, right? No yeast to be found. So I can either make some really flat, crunchy, perhaps not particularly tasty bread at home, or I have another option that humans have been utilizing for thousands and thousands of years, and that is to cultivate my own yeast. So I want to show you guys an image real quick here, because when I think of yeast, I do think of these packets, right? I think of a little square packet, and inside it kind of looks like little grains of almost like fish food, actually, is what it makes me think of. But if we look at yeast up close, let's see if I can share my screen here. So if we look at yeast up close, right, we can see kind of that image over here on the right is kind of the individual little yeasts there. They're a microbe, a microorganism, very, very small. You can see them with a magnifying glass. They like to live in colonies. When they get healthy, they kind of team up and they create kind of this image that you see over here on the left. These are some healthy little yeast colonies. They're technically a fungus, kind of like a mushroom. And they do all sorts of really, really interesting things. Humans have been using them as kind of a biotechnology before biotechnology to make our food taste different, to make it last longer, in some cases to make it alcoholic, to make it bubbly. And those bubbles in particular are what help us make yeast, or what help us make bread. I'm going to share my screen one more time here. I'm going to see if we can get to some of, here we go. This is a beautiful loaf of bread here, loaf of sourdough bread. All of those little holes are bubbles, right? Where the dough has risen and created this nice, delicious, fluffy loaf of bread. But without, whoops. Without those bubbles, you have some pretty flat bread. So as I mentioned, right, we're gonna start DIYing our own yeast. And in order to attract yeast, you have to make a yeast nursery, is what we've been calling it. It's also called a sourdough starter. This is something that a lot of people have kind of started to do. And the Rob Dunlap of Applied Ecology at NC State in particular is studying, of course, applied ecology and yeasts, and how there are just thousands of different strains, and we know so little about how many there are and what they do and how they interact with different ingredients. So making our own starter is one way that I and that all of us can contribute to this study. All that we need is a little bit of flour, some dechlorinated water. You can dechlorinate your water by leaving it out for about 8 hours in a clear container. You combine them in a jar, stir them up, and you've got yourself a yeast trap, right? You have got a little nursery where your yeast can thrive and start to eat the starches and sugars that live in your flour. They will start to eat and multiply, and they will produce gas. Those gas creates those wonderful bubbles that we want for fluffy bread. They also create this really amazing environment with the help of some lactic acid producing bacteria. Those lactic acid producing bacteria produce, of course, lactic acid, making a nice acidic environment that makes it really hard for stuff like bad bacteria and molds to grow inside of your starter. So the Museum of Life and Science, along with the Rob Dunlap, invites all of you to create your own sourdough starter to kind of take a look at all of the different yeasts that live all around you. They will naturally kind of come to your environment that you create for them. So as your starter starts to grow throughout the different days, you feed it and remove a little bit of the what's called backslop, it will rise and rise and rise, and you can track its growth. And that data is something that the Rob Dunlap can use to compare to households all across the country and actually all over the world. I'm going to go ahead and drop in the chat here a link to the Rob Dunlap Wild Sourdough Project page, right? Because there's some more instructions on that page for how to get your sourdough started and participate in what we call our Wild Sourdough Project. You'll get a really cool science experiment out of it. You'll get practice with the scientific method itself. And of course, you may even get some really delicious bread out of it.
Peregrine, thanks so much. I'll also mention that Peregrine has been working hard on making some content at the museum as well to support some learning in this project. And I might ask Peregrine that in the next couple of minutes, maybe we can drop some links to some of those videos as well into the chat. I'll also say that the word backslop is just such a horrible, horrible word to describe the stuff that you take out of your sourdough starter. But yeah, it is the word that people use for some reason. Thank you so much, Peregrine. Up next, we're going to hear from our friend Kathie. Kathie, take it away, pal.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, Max, for inviting me to speak. This is serving as a little bit of an intro. I know I'm a new face to many of you. I'm the new-ish state climatologist of North Carolina, and I sit at NC State University normally. Right now I'm in downtown Raleigh, unfortunately, away from all my really great colleagues, but really happy to be here. In the background, you'll see that I'm also probably not up on a mountain right now. Behind me is the North Carolina EcoNet Tower. We have 43 of these around the state taking all sorts of observations about the atmosphere, weather, agricultural factors, and we're taking over 1 million observations a day. So if you're a weather nut and when you see these big severe storms moving in, if you want to take a look at our network, I'll drop it in the chat box. We have all sorts of really, really fun data, and I find myself on my phone looking at it all the time. Since we are in quarantine and I'm on my computer way too much these days, normally I'm out working with folks and talking with folks, I find that at 5 o'clock, I shut the computer and then go do something else. I always have my phone with me though. And there are a few things that you can find on your phone that can help you participate in observing the weather and the climate. And one of them, I'll also drop this in the chat box, is an app called mPING. And mPING helps you report your precipitation type. And it goes back to scientists, mostly in Norman, Oklahoma, and lets them know what you're actually seeing on the ground. So last night we had a severe thunderstorm sneak up on us in the Triangle. I got on my mPING and said, hey, it's raining here in downtown Raleigh. And that gets sent back to the folks and helps make observations a lot better and helps make our forecast a lot better. So it's something really fun that you can participate in. Another thing that I'm thinking about is that I'm new to North Carolina. This is my first spring here. And I like to experience the weather and the climate by getting out. And I tend to tie my memories about what's happening this year, this month, this week in weather and climate based on where I've been. Well, I'm not really going very far. I'm staying in a basically 2-mile radius in downtown Raleigh, but one of the things that my office does is put together these great monthly recaps of what happened with the weather and what happened with the climate. So if you're like me and you're not getting those opportunities to go out and experience something and say, oh yeah, I remember it was much cooler than normal then, or oh wow, that 90-degree temperature seemed really off, you can go check them out. And we find they're a really approachable way to talk about climate with folks who aren't thinking about it day in and day out like the rest of us. We'll also feature posts on historical events. We look back at hurricanes, what we're thinking about in the future, but also highlight big kind of climate news for North Carolina, including that last year was North Carolina's warmest year on record. So we try to put those things together for you, point you to other folks who might know other things, including topics on phenology, agricultural experts, and other folks around North Carolina who can make that climate connection for you. And Max asked me to share what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about 2020, and not every year is like a stair step. So 2019 was our warmest year on record here in North Carolina, but 2020 is off to the races. It's been very, very warm. We're looking at the year-to-date temperatures, and we don't call the game this early in the year, but it's looking like another warm year. And we're seeing this all across the board. Back when we could be on campus in January, we saw that the trees were flowering early. But if you're like me, you care a lot about things like local food and strawberries. So my background is eating them. I'll be eating them in a little bit, but we have a great strawberry crop this year. These warm temperatures have just produced these amazing berries, and there are great ways that you can get outside, support North Carolina farmers, social distance from each other, and pick up on these great crops. So that's one of the ways I like to experience the local weather and the climate. What's in season? How do I get it locally? And what can I make from it? So I moved here from Oregon. Strawberry season is a little bit earlier, so I'm very, very excited about that. And then with all this rain that we've been having, I've been thinking about measuring it. And we have this great program called CoCoRaHS, and I know the Museum of Life and Sciences also uses CoCoRaHS and is a big fan. But what you can do is get on the CoCoRaHS website. I'll also drop that in the chat. Buy a rain gauge and put it in pretty much any location that's free and clear from buildings and trees. And every day you go out again with your phone and just make an observation of how much rain fell that day. If you go on vacation, when we can go on vacation again, you can do a multi-day report. And I have to stress that this sounds really, really simple, but it's so, so crucial. The highest total that was observed during Hurricane Florence came from a CoCoRaHS observer. So we wouldn't have picked that up on our network here or any of the other, official networks if we didn't have citizen scientists engaging with that. It's also a really great way for you to engage with what is going on. So you've got that written recap. You're outside taking walks and taking photos, but you'll have a really good idea of how wet the year is if you're measuring the rainfall yourself. And if you're like me, you have all sorts of curious friends and family who want to know, what's happening to my tomatoes? Is it really raining this much? Why is it so wet? And you can start to answer some of those questions when you have those data yourself. So those observations mean a lot to me in my office. There are 9 staff, 4 students. We're all in the Triangle area right now working, but what we do is we study North Carolina's climate and weather and how users can make decisions, smart decisions around climate and climate change based on the work and the research that we do. And I have to say that the partnerships that we have across the state are key. And I'm gonna end it right here. I've rambled too much, but I look forward to meeting many of you in person, and please reach out if you have any questions. I'll drop those links soon.
Kathie, thanks so much, and belated welcome to North Carolina. Also, welcome to North Carolina spring. I'm sure that your allergies are just going wild right now. And to that end, I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit more about stuff like that from our next panelist. Sam, you want to take it away?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Sam. Like Max mentioned, I'm the digital community manager at ISeeChange. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what ISeeChange is and how you might use it. And then Jennifer and I can talk a little bit more about our project, our weekly challenges with the museum. Let me share my screen. It's like the most obvious button, and I always can't find it. There we go. All right, so hopefully you all can see. This is our website, ISeeChange. We are a global community of people who are observing weird weather and climate change in their own daily life, their backyard or what they're seeing on their commute. And it's really easy and free to create an account. You just sign up. We also have a mobile app on both Android and iPhone, so you're welcome to sign up that way. And then I thought I'd show you a couple of the different ways that people use ISeeChange. One of the ways is sort of like an individual personal use. We have people who use it to document change in their immediate space over time. So this woman lives in Connecticut and she has been posting for many years about her garden. And so from those observations, we can sort of track what spring in Connecticut is looking like based on, what Judy is seeing. Here, she's covering her fruit trees to hopefully protect them from a late frost. And so that's something you could do if you have a question about like, you know, are my maple trees or is my dogwood or azalea blooming earlier over time? You can start to track that for your own personal record. We also, during extreme weather events, people will post to sort of document that and how that is impacting them. So that maybe that's a hurricane or a flooding event or an extreme heat event. This is a woman who posted last summer in Boston during a heat wave, and it like got up to over 100 degrees in her car. And so she talked about, you know, potentially maybe a solution to that would be if this parking garage had like some sort of cover that had solar panels so it could keep the car cool and also generate clean energy. So it's always fun when people like propose solutions to problems they're seeing as well as just the problems. And then another way that ISeeChange is used is in sort of a collaborative work with a community. So if a community is experiencing a specific problem associated with climate change, like coastal flooding, for example, you can organize a group of residents to document that problem and create a record that then you can take to your local decision makers and say, hey, we have a huge flooding problem in this part of, so this is Ocean City, New Jersey. So we have a huge flooding problem on this part of the island. Why isn't there sort of remediation work being done here? What do we have to do to get you to like take a look at this problem and create change? And so those are, you know, the three major ways that we see people using ISeeChange, but it's a very flexible platform, and you can use it to do all sorts of things that you might be curious about with regards to weather and climate. And if you want a little more structure, we have been working with, and Jennifer can talk a little bit more about this, but every Tuesday afternoon from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern, Max will send out earlier on the day Tuesday a challenge, and a bunch of people will sort of get on ISeeChange in that hour and post their responses to that challenge, and we'll all sort of comment. And it's nice to sort of be doing it synchronously because a lot of the time people are posting on ISeeChange at different times. But I wonder, Jennifer, what you're seeing and what like you might post if you were out on the Tuesday afternoon right now.
Yeah, I know. So, hi everybody. So I'm actually out in one of Ellerby Creek watershed in the Watershed Association in Durham has a couple of preserves that are open and available to the public. So I'm just going to turn my camera around so you can see. So this is one of the preserves that we're in, and I'm out here probably once a week. A lot of times on Tuesday afternoon when we go and do our observations, I tend to come out here to just see what's changed. And the first thing that I actually noticed today coming out here was that rainstorm that snuck up on us last night. I was sitting at home and I was like, is it raining outside? And it was pouring here. And you can see as I get closer, so there is all of this water that's now standing water on both sides of this walkway, and this was not here just a couple of days ago. So that was the first thing that I really noticed when I walked down here. And then another thing is really just how much greener everything is getting as the days go by. So it just feels like a sea of green out here, and it's just like exploding. The other thing that I think is really interesting that I'm beginning to notice, because we just don't have as much of the noise that we make on a regular basis, is all the birds. So we're definitely entering the beginning of a major like migratory bird season here in North Carolina. So we're starting to just see more birds that come into the area that'll nest here, and you can just hear a lot more of them. And in a lot of these preserves, they have bird boxes that are up on a lot of the trees. And as I was walking around, I could actually hear some that were in there. So you can see some that are flying around out here now. And then I also noticed, you can see down here, it looks like we definitely have a mulberry tree right around here somewhere. So those mulberries are starting to actually come out, and they are falling off, and the birds will eat them. But yeah, so it's a great, using ISeeChange to return to the same spot, I found has been really, really enjoyable, because I've really gotten to take in how a space really changes as like time goes on, which I don't necessarily know if I would be as aware of it if I wasn't actually engaged using that app and just kind of seeing how everything is shifting as the weeks go on throughout the year. So I'll turn my camera back around. Awesome.
Sam, Jennifer, thanks so much. It's almost like we're really We're really out there with you. And admittedly, I have loved it because it's been a good motivator to go outside, which is a thing that I have found I have not been doing nearly enough of lately. So like getting this like simulation of getting to walk through the woods, that's the type of content that you'll only get here on this SciStarter webinar. But yeah, thanks so much, my friends. Jennifer, anything else you want to add?
I would just say to what you just said, Max, for everybody to know that it's really the state parks that are just closed right now. So nature preserves in the area and around the state are open, and people have signage up and they're practicing social distancing. So I would encourage you, if there's one nearby, to go and get outside and walk around. It'll do good for you.
It is good to be outside, again, unless you have really bad allergy problems. If you're interested in joining our Tuesday afternoon listserv, I will drop a link where you can sign up for that listserv to receive challenges from us every Tuesday for the 3 to 4 p.m. period. But coming up next, I am going to turn it over to my friend Calvin. Calvin, take it away, pal.
Hi, everyone. My name is Calvin. I am a citizen science program manager at Clean Air Carolina. And I thought I would kind of share some of our perspective, especially in these stay-at-home times, on air quality, citizen science, and maybe how that's impacted some people's health. So I'll share my screen as well. I am actually a program manager for the Air Keepers program. And if you want to know more about that, I left my email address there. But also at the end of this, I'll mention another video that we did on SciStarter's website for Citizen Science Month that gives you even more information. Clean Air Carolina is a nonprofit group, and we kind of look out for air quality for all North Carolina, especially climate, health, and equity is the basis of our focus. And so if you hear Air Keepers as well, that's more or less a program underneath the umbrella of Clean Air Carolina. Specifically, folks like us who like to do involved science, contributory science, citizen science, whatever you call it, people who take a little bit of introspection in their own hands are part of the Air Keepers umbrella. So I figure with my short amount of time, why don't we cover air quality has actually had a pretty strong impact on health. COVID-19 does seem to be affecting air quality, and low-cost air sensors like those that you see in the photo are just about everywhere, and they are really, really cool. So the big question, and I'm not the only one getting this one, a lot of scientists are being asked very often, has COVID-19 affected air pollution? I think I've summed it up. Industrial activity, yep. A lot of places have had to shut down due to a drop in demand, or maybe their employees can't even get there. Road traffic, I'm not going to give it away, but Jeremy's actually working on something pretty cool with that showed that traffic is actually quite a bit down during these times. And then urban areas where you sort of combine the two, definitely a decrease. And lots of cities, I've seen great photos from places like Los Angeles. They're seeing the skylines for the first time in a long time. It's not to say that by any means that this is a benefit we are happy to have despite the pandemic, but it is something we've noticed in the data. One of the biggest issues of it, though, is that it doesn't affect everyone exactly the same. So to go over what is a whole nother presentation, there's something I like to call air equality. And so in the map on the right, we've got Mecklenburg County, where Charlotte, North Carolina is. And around the east, north, and west sides of the cities is a band that they usually call the Crescent. And these were the historically non-white communities happen to reside. There's also some low-income neighborhoods there too, but it's also the part of town with the highest proximity to industrial areas and high traffic roads and communities that may or may not have access to healthcare. There might be food deserts there, right? So we kind of loop these into this overarching umbrella called the social determinants of health. And the reason why it matters is because we measure air quality at kind of a regional scale. 1 or 2 monitors per county is pretty good in the United States. In fact, large swaths of land don't have monitors that frequently. So if we say that an air pollution level is at a certain amount, it doesn't really account for maybe neighborhood to neighborhood variations. And it certainly can't account for the differences in all of the people in those large areas, because people's lives and experiences are still different, even if we can't measure that fine. So one of the ways that we brought citizen science into this was with low-cost air sensors. And so nowadays you can get tiny little particulate matter air quality sensors that you can kind of carry with you. In this case, we were using air beam sensors. We partnered with some of our air keepers and strapped them on bicycles. Over the course of about a year and a half, a group of cyclists commuted to and from work along one of the south corridors of the city. And students at some of our education engagements in schools also use the air beams as kind of part of their basic air quality education curriculum. We then partnered with my friend Matt Adams at the University of Toronto, who's a GIS guy. He's big into spatial data and building maps and spatial modeling. He took a lot of this low-cost sensor data and was able to pinpoint it onto the map using the GPS data that was also included. Use that to create a layer of highs and lows. And then everywhere that we didn't have data, he was able to train a machine learning model to sort of assume that if the place is similar to where we did have some data, we could extrapolate that. It's called a spatial regression model. Down in the bottom right corner there, you'll be able to see kind of this heat map we were able to make with the help of citizen scientists. Why that's really cool is because for that whole area and 1.5 million data points that we collected, there's only 3 regular air quality monitors running full time. So we were able to get a high resolution data set and understanding of where air pollution might be on a typical day. Combine that with data that we're getting from these very not typical COVID-19 days and see how that might impact people whose health is at a greater risk than anywhere else in the county. And we wouldn't be able to do that without the help of the citizen scientists and their trusty bikes. If you want to get into low-cost censoring, it's kind of nerdy and there's a lot of air quality basics to go over. So head back over to the SciStarter webpage. We did an hour-long webinar on the air quality basics, something I like to call AQIQ. And it'll give you an overview of kind of some of the air pollution that you might need to know about, atmospheric chemistry and things that play into air quality and health. We will also have a follow-up of that one, which will be called something like So You Want to Monitor, which I'm pretty excited about. And that should give you the basics on picking an air sensor and maybe how you might use it in your own community, because there's a lot of cool ways to make a lot of neat citizen science data sets with them. Anyway, thanks, Max.
Thank you, Calvin. And I gotta say, you just come up with the catchiest names for stuff. I gotta ping you for figuring out how to name things in really fun ways. Great job with that. Last up, we have my friend Jeremy. Jeremy, take it away, my friend.
Hello, everybody. Greetings from Richmond, Virginia, a couple hours north of Durham, where my friend Max is located. And we are similarly enjoying the same kinds of pollen loads as our friends to the south. Richmond actually steals the usually a top 5 spot on the country's sneeziest and wheeziest cities list. So if you didn't know that and you want to come visit a place for, it's top 5 placements on various lists, that's one of them that you could use as justification to come to Richmond. I am the chief scientist at the Science Museum of Virginia. We are trying to figure out ways that we can get involved in figuring out a little bit more about our natural world. And I want to share a little bit about a project that we've been doing and some initial stuff that we might use to expand a little bit more community participatory citizen science kinds of things in the near future before we can get back together in groups, which we're hoping is sometime soon. But also realize that that's up to the guidance of our local health department and governor. So to give you a little bit of background on them, I'm going to share my screen and show, this is kind of what's gone on here in Virginia. We had a Executive Order 51 on March 13th that established as much as you could, businesses that could telework, state employees working from home by and large. And then on the 30th was when we did the full stay-at-home lockdown. And that's supposed to go on until June 10th. Currently, that we have some emerging details about what it could mean to slowly reopen the state in response to data-driven decision makings around new cases, hospitalizations, and things related to COVID-19. But this just gives us like a baseline of where did most people start staying home, and where did we all, at least in non-essential workers, stay home. And in response to these, we've seen some really amazing things going on about public space. So we've been working with our Parks Department to understand how many more of us are getting outside and going to those beautiful places. Like I think Jennifer was at one of these spots. The Capitol Trail connects downtown Richmond, Virginia, all the way out to Colonial Williamsburg. It's a 50-mile trail that you can ride both ways. Absolutely gorgeous, goes through some of the most fantastically Virginia kind of landscapes that you can imagine. Also, not only these long, stretches of people can, walk and recreate in either direction, but also our local parks here in Chesterfield County, which is just south of the city of Richmond. Many of us are getting out and enjoying parks in very large numbers. And so we're trying to track a kind of the growth in those public spaces through time to show just how much we were able to get out and enjoy that natural world. But some other things I've seen come through on social media and through news outlets, I wanted to share some of my favorites, my top 3 of things that have been going on around the world, not just in Richmond. So people are out enjoying public spaces. So too are the critical habitat or critical species that use habitats that are generally inhabited by people kind of on a recreational level. So baby leatherback turtles have apparently been thriving. And as someone who watches a lot of nature documentaries, this is always the saddest part in the documentary, is watching the baby turtles hatch. And so being able to say that these leatherback turtles in some way are thriving due to a temporary restriction from people being able to access it is an interesting thing for me. My second favorite thing, is Philadelphia's pizza groundhog. Everybody's favorite pizza rat from New York from a couple years ago, which may or may not have been a hoax. This does not seem to be that same thing. And so, even if we can't get out and enjoy our local restaurants as much as we'd like, maybe even, things as uncommon as a groundhog might be out there, having a slice or two, when on their free time. And then finally, probably my favorite article that I've seen that wasn't an Onion article, but seemed a lot like it, was from Wales, where a flock of sheep visited an empty McDonald's restaurant. I just think that it's so interesting to see how many places that we see as disjointed from nature, it's like we're always there, and humans are part of ecosystems all around us that just because we're not in them doesn't mean they went away or aren't there when we're not looking. So I think it's a really interesting thing to hear. So anyway, here in Richmond and across the country, in response to that stay-at-home order, we've seen a huge substantial decrease in the amount of traffic. So the blue line here is a 7-day weekly average. Around that time that Virginia established its first kind of telework practices in the mid part of, or like the second week of March, a little decline. And then this has basically stayed pretty constant no matter where you're looking. We also work with the Maryland Department of the Environment and the Virginia Department of Transportation. And we've seemed to have reached this kind of like minimum level where I don't know if any further reductions in traffic, unless we were to all of a sudden, change who is essential, who's non-essential, and truck traffic that is getting like our raw materials and food around the country, transportation related, were to slow down. I think we're kind of at this like, minimum level of maximum level of traffic disruption in some ways. And I made this little interesting graphic for the city of Richmond, because we always like to localize things in any way that we can. And so nationally is about a 40% decrease. And across the top here, we have the different types of cars that are counted by traffic counters on our nearby interstate. Much like what we've seen nationally, about a 40% decrease in the amount of passenger travel around the Richmond area, and a not as large decrease in the amount of truck traffic. Which again, this is in some ways a good thing, because we need those large trucks to be carrying our groceries and excess toilet paper around to refill where everybody bought a whole bunch of it really fast. So what I've noticed in response to this, and many people talking, is that, and of course, like what Calvin just said, working with the Department of Environmental Quality, that has this had a measurable impact on our air quality. And here we've got a time of the day along the x-axis and the amount of NO2, which is a precursor to ozone, as well as particulate matter, which Calvin did a very nice job explaining why it matters to our health. And so 2016 through 2019 are these several lines on this graph. And you can see these two bars that I've put on the graph represent rush hour. And unsurprisingly, at an air quality sensor right next to an interstate, there are huge imprints of our day-to-day traffic pretty consistently across the last 4 or 5 years. Then when we look at what has happened so far in 2020, there's been a major reduction, a significant reduction in the amount of pollution during those peak times. And this it seems like we're working on kind of a model here of how much does a traffic volume reduction then mean in a reduction in NO2 at this roadside location. So this is really exciting work that we'll continue looking at in the future. Now, the corollary to NO2 in some ways is particulate matter. So particulate matter is one of those things that we've seen is higher exposure actually leads to several other respiratory outcomes and disproportionately impacts those of us in our cities that have lower resources. And anyway, you can see the same kind of hump pattern here, the two peaks during rush hour times. There's a little bit of a difference. Here's 2016 down here, which requires a little bit of extra looking into what might have been different during 2016. Because 2020 has been even lower. It's basically flattened out any sense of a rush hour overprint. Now, 2020 has also been so far, on top of being really warm, as Kathie mentioned before, it's also been very rainy. We've had, I think, the tied for third number of days with at least some sort of measurable form of precipitation since the beginning of the year. As far as like January 1st to April 26th, it's about the third rainiest spring as far as the number of days with measurable precipitation. If any sort of precipitation, a lot of the times will pull these particles out of the air, in effect cleaning it. So it'll be really, really interesting to look at after social restrictions have been lifted. How does this system respond to reintroducing passenger traffic? Through time in response to us getting back out on the road. Now, of course, these reductions remain temporary until we decide to make these things permanent through policies that either remove those emissions from our cars, or give us enough different types of options for transportation that we no longer have to rely on this many cars in volume through time. So, fewer cars, better air quality, and a researcher from Boston has noticed that this actually means a much quieter city. In Boston, the Noise in the City project has registered a close to 30 decibel improvement to background noise in the city of Boston. So we're really, really interested in figuring out if we can capture, remember what I said, we're kind of at this like low point in the amount of traffic, which creates a lot of the background noise in our urban areas, as Calvin mentioned before. And so what we're thinking is like, well, this is a better time than ever to establish some baseline car-free-ish urban noise background levels for the city of Richmond and elsewhere. So if you'd like, there are a couple different options for how you can contribute to understanding noise levels in your city, either in Richmond or beyond. We've been toying around with the Noise Score app, which is directly related to the research that's been going on in Boston for many years. And it's available both on the App Store and Google Play. But then I know that there's an affiliate, a SciStarter affiliate through the Silent Earth program at NASA. And it's available through the Anecdata app, which is a SciStarter affiliate. So however you want to participate in this data collection, I think it's just important to get started. And sometimes it's fun to go to your favorite intersection, take a few minutes of noise data, and then 6 months from now, a year from now, go back at that same time period on the same day and see how much it's changed and reflect on our experiences over the last several months and into the future. So with that, I think I am out of slides. So thank you very much, everybody, for allowing me to speak a little bit about the work we've been doing at the Science Museum of Virginia.
Hey, Jeremy, thanks so much. A couple notes. First of all, with regards to that sheep at the McDonald's picture, I saw a description of that image online that was titled "Old McDonald's, now a farm," which I think is pretty good.
I love that so much.
Yeah, really good stuff. There's a thing they don't tell you sometimes in education. When you're convening a panel like this, if you want somebody to speak for 10 minutes, you tell them to speak for 5 minutes. But of course, our wonderfully skilled and talented group of panelists that we have here all did such an excellent job of sticking to the allotted time that they were given that we have a little bit of extra time, which is always a really nice thing to have. So first of all, if you are watching us live and can participate in the Q&A and you have questions for any of the panelists here so far, please feel free to use that Q&A function there in Zoom. I would love to use the remaining time that we have left to sort of reflect on all of the incredible projects that we've learned, because all of us here on the panel, as well as I suspect many of the folks who are joining us to watch this, are obviously quite science inclined, and so many of us are getting a lot of questions from friends and family members about what COVID means for, like, insert science topic here, right? And one of the really lovely pieces about citizen science, community science, participatory science is that it kind of allows you to come back with a beautiful, very scientific answer of I don't know, which is lovely, and that there is an opportunity for all of us to be learning together at the same time. So I love that it gives us that chance and that power to say that I don't know, and that potentially nobody knows, that some of the questions that are being asked are not only beyond the knowledge and expertise here on our illustrious panel, but perhaps also beyond the likely beyond the body of knowledge of science at large, which I think is pretty excellent. I'm going to use the last few minutes to challenge all of my panelists to think now about why some of this might be personally relevant to them. And obviously, I don't want you to share anything super overly personal, but I think a thing that can sometimes be missed with data-driven projects is that sometimes it can lose the personal relevance. And it's a lovely thing, again, about citizen science is that it allows us to tie in real ongoing science to why and how it is important to you on a personal level as well. So if I think about everything that I have just heard and learned about from all of the folks here, and I tie in questions that I have had since starting the sourdough project along the lines of, like, why does my next door neighbor's sourdough starter smell so much better than mine? If you notice on the page to engage in this project, the aroma wheel is a real hallmark of this project and is an incredible function of it. But, like, I have no idea why we live a couple 100 feet away from each other and theirs smells so much better than mine. And I also noticed the other day this like odd ringing sound that I've never heard before. And it took me about an hour to figure out that it's so quiet where I live now that I can hear the still ringing bells at the middle school down the road to say when classes are supposed to change. And both of those are again, immediately personally relevant to me about projects that we just heard about. I wonder if any of our panelists might be able to speak to why or how some of these might be important to some of y'all as well. And if I don't hear from somebody who wants to volunteer soon, I may use one of those, again, educator secrets here and volunteer somebody. Sam, you're unmuted, so you're on
I
the
can
spot.
talk. Yeah, so, well, of the projects we talked about, I've only used ISeeChange, but I'm excited to check out some of the other ones. But when I joined the ISeeChange team in 2017, I started documenting things in my garden. And so it's been really fun to see this spring, like how things have compared all of the springs in the past. I'm in Wisconsin, so we're still just starting to get into the blooming of things. But, you know, the last 2 springs were very cold, and this spring was more, I would call it a normal spring, but to see like how my baseline has shifted in terms of like what I think is normal and what time I, you know, expect my daffodils to be blooming. Like it should probably in Wisconsin shouldn't be, you know, mid to late March, but in my head that's normal now. And so it's been really fun to be able to like sort of check my assumptions all of the time, and also to do that like alongside of the community, and see, you know, how what I'm experiencing in my area compares to what people in North Carolina are experiencing, compares to what people in Russia are experiencing. So it's really fun to sort of have these conversations around change, because sometimes that change can be really scary and overwhelming, and to sort of like ground it in these community conversations has been really valuable for me as somebody who like works in climate change all the time, and that can be kind of like a head trip. It can kind of mess you up a little. So to be able to talk about it and really like learn about it at a very like personal backyard level has really been great fun.
And I'll add on that really quickly. I'm moving back to Florida pretty soon, and I'm really excited to have ISeeChange as a tool during hurricane season.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I back when I lived in Florida, I didn't know about it, and every hurricane season I would kind of like informally keep my own records, and I'm so excited to actually do it through an official science project.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I'll jump in there. I mentioned I'm fairly new to North Carolina. I'm going to download ISeeChange immediately and step outside and experience my city through that. But in thinking about climate and COVID, there are some days where I wake up and think, climate change is still happening. We still have to deal with this. And somebody brought up climate deniers, and I thought, we still have those? That's still happening? And realizing it's not an either or, it's a both and some days my ability to think about climate change does fluctuate. I'm the state climatologist, and I'm admitting this to you. I wanted to offer that as a little bit of kindness and empathy, that these are 2 really big things that are happening to us. And if you're waking up in the morning and thinking, you know, I'm going to take the day off from thinking about climate change, go for it. If you're not going to watch the newest documentary by some man, I won't mention it, you know, do that. Just right now, I think we need to get through this together, and we'll get through climate change together. And there are so many parallels, and so many people are thinking about different things, but I just wanted to offer that up, that climate professionals are a little bit overwhelmed right now about thinking about climate change.
That's very kind and very considerate of you, Kathie. Any of our other panelists? Calvin, go for it, pal.
I love what you said, and welcome to North Carolina, by the way. We're really proud to have you. I think there's been enough attention around a science issue, which is a pandemic, a public health pandemic, and an epidemiological crisis. And to see the public, including myself, wrestle with things that we don't know very well, and models about what we expect that risk to be. And then ground truth data of like hospital visits coming back in and telling us, well, what it actually ended up being. The conversations I get, and this is the most fun part, might be people asking me, just knowing I'm their resident nerd, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this article? What do you think about this? There's a great brokering of science humility that she just mentioned, which was really great, which was, I don't know, sometimes I'm really worried too. We're both in this boat together, but everyone is making this pivot, which is away from, I'm going to handle my individual actions and everyone else can just do whatever they want. And people are starting to go, I think the systems that sort of make the world run the way it does will eventually impact me. And the ways I operate in those systems will also impact others. And it only took a pandemic for us to start thinking about systems and interconnectivity, but people really are grasping that a model is always flawed, but sometimes very helpful, and that people's individual activities can be compounded into risk for others and for systems and for economies. And so I think we will see, optimistically, we will see a pivot in people's sort of outlook on the way things are interconnected, what numbers mean and can tell us, and how we can act to both protect ourselves and others.
Calvin, that's really beautiful. And in the National Academy's report about the learning that does happen in citizen science, one of the nicer pieces of it, I thought, was the ability that it has to help to shape folks' understanding of the nature of science as well, which I think you did a great job of touching on right there. There was a really interesting question about about there being a lot more lawn mowing going on. I am seeing some like really nicely tended lawns lately, and I'll say again, I don't have the data to talk with any authority about this, but I will say that every time that I try to do a webinar, which is very often, it seems like somebody is doing that right outside. So that's really the only insight that I have. Anybody else want to try to take that one on? Calvin.
All right. I was actually muted for as much as I possibly could because at my apartment, it's leaf blower day, which is the worst day of all days. But the leaves are blown, the lawns really are being taken care of. I think a lot of people are also finding that the yeast is gone because we're finding new hobbies. And I think gardens are going to be something that we find a few months from now to be just wonderful. Take a look at your social media pretty soon when people's, well, half of them will die, but some of them are going to do really great and have gorgeous gardens. All of this will affect, there will be other bubbles that exchange from this, right? We're finding that home gyms are, of course, going to be closed because they're non-essential. You're probably seeing, if you're in an urban area like I am, 3 times as many joggers as you're used to, because they were in a bar fitness class or something in yoga, and they can't be in those groups now. All of these systems, when they're depleted in one, they're going to start unloading into another. And that's that interconnectivity that I think will be really, really cool. And frankly, the post-COVID, the next normal stuff is just going to be wildly interesting because we're not going to just revert back to exactly the same. It'll be a little bit different. And how different is the scientific inquiry that we're all finding so interesting.
Very cool. I think we have time for maybe one more person, if one more person wants to give an answer or an anecdote.
In our last second, I'm going to quickly share my screen again, just to show the people tuning in from home that our webinar recording is already up on the SciStarter page. So you can go ahead and click to watch that later if you want to hear this again or share it with others. And you can find links to CoCoRaHS and ISeeChange, which you heard about in the presentation. And I'll work with the panelists to embed other links that were shared during this presentation on this page as well.
I love it. Peregrine, you were first on our panel. I'll let you have the last word. Go for it, my friend.
Thank you. I was hoping to slide something in right here at the end, just to kind of underscore all of the beautiful messaging I've been hearing about kind of community and coming together. And it makes me think a lot of this strange experiment that goes on inside of a mason jar where you combine water and flour and hope for yeast to come to help you create food, right? And of course, everybody eats. just like ecology, right, on the microbial level, on the very small level, is all about organisms working together and occupying different niches to serve their own and each other's needs to create a better environment, right? And that's on a very, very small level. I think that's something that we're all doing together on a larger level as well. We're all kind of combining our own specific talents and creating overall a wonderful and cooperative environment that I think is going to come out stronger and greater in the long run.
So you're saying we are all part of a big sourdough?
We are. We're part of the sourdough of the world.
What a lovely sentiment to end our webinar on. Thank you so much to all of our attendees for joining us and watching today. And a special thank you, of course, to all of our really incredible panel. This was such a fun and amazing conversation, and I'm so honored that all of y'all spent some time and energy to be here with us today. Caroline, you want to finish this up?
Yeah, I'm going to click stop recording. We're going to